Hey, what's up? Nico DPS here once again, and today it is finally time to go over the patch 3.19 patch notes. I've been really anxious about this, seeing what made its way into the patch notes, seeing the new league mechanic, all sorts of stuff. I've been seeing the unique item adjustments all over Reddit. That's got me really excited as well. So we got a lot of things to touch on. I will say I'm not going to touch on really anything that was brought up in the manifesto, as it seems like pretty much the entire manifesto made its way in. But other than that, we're going to go over as many topics as we can that are relevant to most people playing the game. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so let's kick it off with the new league mechanic. So right here in front of us, we got the mirrored tablet. It seems like this is going to be the main thing you're going to be interacting with during your normal mapping playtime. And basically what we got here, you see some numbers over all of these tiles. What these numbers represent is the distance from the entrance, which is this blue tile right here. And as you get further away from the entrance, the content gets more difficult, but also more rewarding. And you can obviously pick from a number of choices each time you open up this mirrored tablet in a new map to modify these little nodes right here, right? And the further away it gets, the more valuable it gets. So that's really what you're going for, right? And I think this is a really interesting one. I'm sure they did this on purpose. Right here, this top choice here, swap entrance with an empty tile. And if we look down at the bottom right here at this one that's labeled with a number 3, that's an empty tile. And we can actually, if we do that, it would swap the entrance all the way down here to the bottom right, and then it would then be 10 tiles away from essentially the end of the tablet or the end of the node where the map would end. So you actually have 10 different chests when you enter the Lake of Kalandra, 10 different sections of the lake that give a reward, and it gets increasingly more rewarding and difficult. So really cool mechanic in my opinion. It doesn't seem like it's going to take too much time, which is a big deal. I don't like any league mechanics that interrupt the normal gameplay too much. I think most good league mechanics involve they kind of just passively juice a map or require very little interaction, and this seems to be pretty good overall. Yeah, you have to stop and look at a tablet, but that's not that big of a deal, right? You don't have to think for too long. Click on it, keep moving. So very good overall in my opinion. Next up, we got what's likely to be a chase unique. This is absolutely insane. This ring is nuts, and this is definitely going to be one of the goals I'm going to have during this league, is to obtain one of these, because reflecting your other ring is absolutely insane, and I think it's going to be really cool to mess around with, and I'm really excited to try and get my hands on one like this. Seeing this right here, I think this is very cool, and I'm curious to see what it's going to be like in the future. However, I just thought of this while I was talking. I wonder if it's going to have something to do with what we're about to go into next, where it actually flips all the values of your ring. I'm not sure. I don't think so, but we'll see, because that would be a little odd. But yeah, let's dig down here and let's go see what we can do with some items here. So right here, I think this mostly has to do with jewelry. At least that's what I remember them showcasing during the live stream reveal. And as you can see here, you have this crazy item with not only plus values but minus values, and some of them are crazy high, right? Like +2 level to fire skill gems is insane, but minus 57 damage multiplier. But in return, you know, you're getting 178 maximum life, right? Like it's incredible. You're basically trading off some things for better modifiers on other ones, right? And so if your build doesn't use fire damage over time multiplier or damage over time multiplier, but you like life, you don't need lightning res, and you really want fire skill gems, this is insane, right? Like this is kind of a bad showcase overall, but it's really cool. I think we can make some really cool items with this and play around with. I'm very excited to get into it and see what kind of crazy stuff we can make. So overall, it's got me really hyped up. Down here next, for some reason I can't expand it, but essentially these are memories. This is another new mechanic that they said was actually going to be going core as well after this is all done. And essentially, if we look down just below it, once you get a memory and you right click it and you apply it to a map, these are tradable, by the way, but apparently they're pretty rare, and you probably want to do them yourself the few times you do get them, because they seem like a lot of fun and they seem very rewarding. So when you right click a memory and you apply it to any map on your map device, it's basically going to create a string of connected maps, and as you get deeper into the memory, it becomes more difficult and more rewarding as well. So the interesting part here is when I first saw this before he mentioned just a little bit down the road, as I was like, oh, what about singular focus with this? How is that going to work? So this is actually not going to affect singular focus at all. It's perfectly fine to run it, because once you open up this memory, the vendor that you turned it into is actually going to provide the next map in succession for each one, and you can roll them and modify them yourself, but it's not attached to your map device in any other way. It's not affected by your Atlas skill tree or anything of that nature, but they make sure to, he said, he touched on they're going to be more rewarding than usual to kind of account for that. So it's not going to affect your mapping if you like running singular focus like myself, which is very good. So they definitely thought about this sort of thing, and I'm really excited. I think most of the things about this league I'm really excited about, and I just want to get right into it. I'm super hyped, as you can tell. I'll probably repeated myself a bunch of times already, but hey, that's what you want, right? So especially after that very underwhelming manifesto, this was a good patch note review. This was a good reveal, and it's got me excited for the league for sure. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and touch on the amazing Trickster changes. I'm really excited for this. I'm even thinking about league starting it. I think it's that good. Yeah, let's just get right into it. These are pretty awesome overall. We'll go clockwise, and we'll start at Heartstopper up here. So really one of the only things underwhelming about this Trickster node is Heartstopper. I'm never really a big fan of any sort of offensive or defensive mechanic that kind of has a cycle, right? It just seems it's sort of unreliable, and for the most part, you want as much, especially defensively, you want something as reliable defensively as possible. And so I don't think most people are going to be taking Heartstopper, especially when you see some of these other notables on the ascendancy and see how powerful, especially defensively, that they are. Next up, Escape Artist. It looks the same as it always has been, so there's nothing to really touch on there. Now, Spellbreaker. Spellbreaker is absolutely insane, if you ask me. 20% base chance to suppress spell damage, fantastic. Prevent 10% of suppressed spell damage, also really strong. That's essentially just 10% less spell damage. If you have 100% chance to suppress, that's just 10% less spell damage, and that can be any element, chaos, fizz, anything that is spell based. You're taking 10% less damage, which is incredible. And then this last line here, I think a lot of people are going to sleep on, but personally, if you ask me, I think this is actually pretty powerful, especially in a mapping scenario. 50% chance to recharge, chance for energy shield recharge to start when you suppress. So during a mapping scenario, this is pretty much going to be on permanently. And there's a couple nodes on the skill tree, and I think some armor modifiers that increase your energy shield recharge rate. And I think this can get absolutely nuts defensively when it comes to energy shield regen, not counting some of the other nodes down here, which also include energy shield leech and something like Aegis Aurora. I think if you build a Trickster properly, you're going to be basically unkillable, and I'm really interested to play around with it and try it all out. All right, next up we got Soul Drinker, which I kind of touched on just a second ago. We got some damage leached as ES, always very good. 20% increased attack and cast speed while leeching energy shield, and energy shield leech effects are not removed when energy shield is filled, which is amazing. Any leech mechanic that does not get removed when you're on full life or ES is always going to be very powerful. It's always very good defensively and offensively. There's a lot of nodes on the tree that you can kind of, deal extra damage when on full ES and suppress and all this sort of stuff. So it's very strong and a very good node, and I can't wait to try it out once again. I think this is also a very good one. Up next, we got One Step Ahead. This is a really interesting one. Your action speed is at least 100% of 8% of base value. And for those that don't know, action speed is basically its movement speed, cast speed, attack speed, anything that's speed involved. Action speed modifies it, and it's a more multiplier. So you basically get 8% more attack, cast, movement speed, and whatever else it might also account for. That is incredible. And also, nearby enemies' monsters' action speed is at most 92% of base value. So they, by default, just from taking this node, any nearby monster is going to have 8% reduced action speed, which is insane. That's a very powerful defensive mechanic, and you can scale it because it says at most. So you can then reduce it even further by something like temp change, which is very cool. That basically takes 8% action speed off the top, and then you can scale it further from there. So another powerful defensive mechanic. I just can't wait. This is so cool. I absolutely agree with what they did to Trickster. And look at this next one over here. We'll touch on Swift Killer. Swift Killer is incredible, if you ask me. With how powerful some of these defensive mechanics are, we definitely want to see something for offense, right? Because you need a way to scale damage. Swift Killer is definitely it. +2 to maximum frenzy charge. +2. That is insane with 200% charge duration, which is very good in a mapping scenario. You know, as you're getting towards the end of a map, you have 200% increased charge duration on top of the travel nodes here. Your frenzy charges, every charge is going to be lasting quite a long time. So that's very good even in a bossing scenario too. If you have a way to generate during bosses, they're going to be lasting quite a long time. So they're very reliable, right? Which is what I touched on a little while ago. Having a reliable, long-lasting mechanic is what you really want on your character, because you want them to be as active for most of your playtime, right? When you're out there killing monsters, killing bosses, you want those mechanics to be active as much as possible. So all your damage is as smooth as possible. So Swift Killer is an awesome node. I'm definitely going to be taking this when I run Trickster. It is amazing, and I can't wait to play with it. So frenzy charge stacking, it can get a lot of fun, get super speedy, all sorts of stuff. All right, the last one here, we got Polymath. So 3% more damage for each different type of mastery you have allocated, as well as recover 1% life, energy shield, and mana on kill for each different type of mastery you have allocated. So this is really, really cool. So I think it's each different type of mastery you have allocated. I think that's an interesting point. I wish they would have just left it as to all mastery points allocated, because there's so many of them that you kind of just duplicate on that you actually can't scale the value too much. So at most, I think you're going to get maybe 12% more damage out of this, which, I mean, 12% more damage is awesome, as well as, you know, 4, maybe 5% life, ES, and mana on kill, which is also very, very good. I think this is a pretty supplementary ascendancy notable. I don't think it's something you're really going to go all into and try and scale. It's just a nice supplementary damage and recovery ascendancy notable. But if you're asking me just right now when I'm looking at everything, I think most people, I think just from when I first looked, you're going to go to Escape Artist. I probably would go into Spellbreaker, one step ahead, in Swift Killer. I think some of these other notables on the Ascendancy tree are so powerful and so much more sought after. I don't think we'll see too much use out of this, but I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody will come up with some crazy build where you use a bunch of different mastery points and scale some damage, and I'll be happy to see it and check it out. But overall, I think this is one of the weaker ones, or probably the weakest one, and even then it's still pretty strong. So man, Trickster has been completely revamped. It's got a lot of life breathed right back into it. I'm really excited. I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up league starting this. I'm so excited about it, just as a change of scenery, especially with the lack of skill changes and the skill gems being lackluster. This is where I'm going to be going for kind of change of pace, right? So overall, extremely happy with the Trickster changes, as I've said about 1,000,000 times by now, and I can't wait to actually play it. Okay, next up, let's touch on the Exalted and Divine Orb changes. I gotta say, this is something I absolutely was not expecting, but I definitely agree with GGG on their reasoning behind the change. Essentially, their reasoning behind the change was Exalted Orbs were the de facto metamod currency, as well as there was no vendor recipe for them, and they were already extremely rare, that very few were generated, but a lot were being used. So the demand was very high, but the supply was very low, so the prices went way, way up. And in turn, especially in Trade League, people didn't really feel like they would want to use that Exalted Orb for its actual intended purpose, which is to, you know, roll an extra modifier on a rare item. So their intention was to kind of change that to make it feel more reasonable to actually use Exalted Orbs for what they're meant to be used for, which I absolutely agree with. I'm definitely excited. Even myself, I have no problems making currency, but very rarely am I going to slam an Exalted Orb, right? At least before. Now, I think I'll be a little more keen on using those a little more often. You'll feel less bad about it. And in turn, they now removed the Divine Orb recipe and made Divine Orbs the de facto metamod currency. So you're kind of going to see it flip in value. I don't think Exalted Orbs are ever going to go down to the value of a Divine Orb, but I think they're going to go down significantly in price, maybe 30 to 50 C, I would guess, maybe a little higher. Who knows? It's hard to really predict the economy, but Divine Orbs are definitely going to skyrocket in price, likely equivalent to something where the Exalted Orbs originally, right? Somewhere probably around 150. It all depends on what time of the league you're in, but usually it's around 150, somewhere in that range for most leagues. So a very interesting change, something I absolutely agree with, and I would like to just warn you, be careful early league, especially if you're not experienced with the economy and the upcoming changes. Do not get scammed on Divine Orbs. Do not get scammed on Exalted Orbs. Make sure you pay close attention to the market with this, because it will everything's going to be so crazy and turbulent early on with the market when it comes to Exalted and Divine Orbs that you can it's probably pretty risky, and you could lose a lot of money if you aren't careful. So keep a close eye on that while you're playing in the new league. All right, next up, we can touch on the changes to unique items. This has been a pretty exciting one over the last week, seeing all the spoilers on Reddit, all that sort of stuff. It's been pretty cool. I've seen a lot of very cool changes to uniques, and I think they're really going in the right direction with uniques now, and it's very exciting if you ask me. A lot of these might not be super in-game build enabling unique still, but they're powerful enough now if you find them early league that they're going to make a huge difference to your build most likely, or they will allow builds to come online quicker, right? So touch on something like Sorrow, the change was to now give it, instead of 50% cold conversion, 100% cold conversion, which is awesome. If you think of something like Cold Blade Vortex, beforehand it was quite difficult to get up to that 100% cold conversion threshold because there was only a 40% mastery on the tree and 50% from Sorrow, and you're just lacking 10%, which is essentially 10% less damage, which hurts overall. Now you don't even have to worry about that. You buy Sorrows, your cold BV is immediately online, and you can worry about scaling it with some more in-game gloves later. It's far less to worry about. You don't even need the mastery on the tree anymore, which could open up a lot of points. There's just so many possibilities. I absolutely agree with GGG on the direction they're going with these. It's very exciting, and hell, I might even make some fun leveling builds that don't involve Hollow Palm Smite, right? That's basically the go-to that I would use for leveling, and I would just have a Hollow Palm Smite set up, and any character I need to level, it's all basically the same thing, and just blast through the campaign and get straight to maps. I'll still love to blast through the campaign and get straight to maps, but maybe with something different now, right? A lot of these uniques have very low level requirements, so you can actually get a leveling build online pretty quickly. So that's really exciting, and I'm really excited to see further changes in the future with more of these uniques, right? They said there was something like 700 plus uniques, and this change only involves like 100 of them so far. So for the future of the game, I think this is very good and makes the game a lot healthier when it comes to uniques, and there's a lot of changes, a lot of very exciting changes to them. So needless to say, as I've repeated myself 100 times, this is great. All right, let's talk about the Archnemesis adjustments coming with this league. I gotta say, overall, I don't necessarily agree with the direction they went in with the Archnemesis adjustments, but I don't think it's too bad. The main disappointing change here is the fact that rare monsters are going to be less common across the board, right? Base game, all league mechanics and things of that nature that spawned a bunch of rare monsters, that's going to be toned down significantly, which is the bad aspect of it, if you ask me. The more rare monsters and magic monsters, the better, right? So they're going to be less common now, which is disappointing. However, some of the good things with these changes, in my opinion, is rare monsters are going to be on average spawning with less modifiers, right? They could spawn with up to 4 still, as they could previously, but it's less common to encounter 4 mod rare monsters and even 3 mod rare monsters. It seems like the baseline is going to be 2 that you're going to be experiencing in most maps, and you have a chance to get 3 and 4 and encounter them less often overall, which for most people, that's not a bad change, right? That's not a bad change whatsoever. That's actually good. In a way, it does tone down Archnemesis somewhat because you're encountering less modifiers, which is good for most people. But if you are a Headhunter or Inspired Learning enjoyer like myself, that's actually a significant nerf to Headhunter and Inspired Learning. Not only to the reduction in the spawn rates of rare monsters, but the less modifiers means you're stealing less modifiers, and the removal of Valley of Darkness is another modifier that you were stealing before that you can no longer steal. So Headhunter and Inspired Learning actually got a pretty significant nerf, if you ask me, and they're going to be far less valuable, I would assume, in the next league, which for me is a little disappointing. I love Headhunter. It's one of the best chase items in the game. It's a ton of fun to play with if you can afford it. Highly recommend it. But that's just what we're going to have to deal with, I guess. Now, another good thing that did happen is they're kind of essentially with this paragraph, down here, they're trying to make magic monsters a little more predictable. They're going to spawn with less random modifiers. And if you see a large group of magic monsters, they're all going to have the same sort of modifiers, and they removed some of the more annoying ones. So overall, not too bad with the magic monsters. They're going to be a little more predictable and not just be so random and across the board, which is good. So another thing I guess I can touch on is leveling. It's still pretty much a hard skip for most Archnemesis rares, but magic monsters are going to be a little less deadly. So that's a plus when it comes to leveling, because most of the time you're not really stopping to kill many rare monsters. You're stopping to kill magic and white monsters and going. So overall, a little bit of a buff there, I guess, for league start when it comes to magic monsters. So that's good. All right, next up we can touch on some of the past league mechanics that are now core and being adjusted, as well as Ultimatum sort of being brought back, which a lot of people are hyped about. We can start off here with Beyond. Now, unfortunately, I can't comment on the Beyond changes too much due to the fact that I actually didn't play Scourge League. I had taken off that league due to some real life stuff, but I can say that the removal of the original Beyond is kind of sad. I really liked Beyond. It was a ton of juice to your maps, especially in higher end content. It increased the difficulty exponentially, made the drops a lot more juicy. That's a little disappointing, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in actually getting a little taste of what Scourge was like, at least somewhat, and messing around with some of those tainted currencies. Overall, I don't think this is too bad. I'm sure this one's pretty split with the community based on people who maybe did or didn't like Scourge, as well as people who maybe did or didn't like the original Beyond. So this is an interesting one. I'm definitely curious to test it out and actually get a taste of it, but overall, nothing too crazy if you ask me. Next up, we can touch on Harvest. Now, the Harvest changes are incredibly good. So one of the main downfalls of Harvest, number one, was the fact that you basically had to use TFT to sort of find any of these harvest crafts that you couldn't find on your own, or you didn't have enough room in your hoardercraft station, right? Like maybe you didn't need to use these hoardercrafts, but others could, so you had to get online to try and sell them, and it was just this big headache and a lot of micromanaging with the hoardercraft station. That's pretty much all gone. Now, anytime you do a harvest, it just drops some currency, you pick it up, go to the next plant, harvest it, rinse and repeat, right? And you can just save up this currency and then go buy the crafts, which is awesome. This is so much better. And it removes the aspect of trading from it, because now all of these are just tied to a currency that is bound to you, and you can just save up and go for the crafts you actually want. So overall, for the harvest changes, I think they are absolutely fantastic. The less I have to deal with TFT and the rest of regular player base has to deal with TFT, the better, because harvest with TFT was just a complete nightmare. It took forever. You had people just sniping, especially the good harvest crafts. They'd get sniped up immediately. It'd be hard to find. You'd have to give your item to a random person you may or may not know that they could possibly brick your item. It was just a ton of headache, and it was not necessary at all. And I'm happy they were targeting the adjustment for harvest to actually take TFT out of the equation with it. So overall, I'm definitely happy with the changes to harvest. Now, I don't see it listed here, but basically in this same vein, Ultimatum is sort of getting brought back. So essentially there's going to be a map that allows you to encounter the Ultimatum boss, which means some of those Ultimatum uniques are coming back, including Hateforge. I'm really curious to see what people can come up with Hateforge now with the new mechanics with rage involved and stuff like that. It's really interesting. It's got me really excited. I played a Hateforge build in the past and had an absolute blast, and I'm curious to see what it'll bring back to the table. So that's really exciting to me. Even if it's only brought back via a map boss in a specific map, that's okay. I'll take what I can get, because Ultimatum was absolutely awesome. And in the reveal, they did comment on Ultimatum. The mechanic itself, like that you would run into in the maps, isn't off the table. They're actually working on ways to implement it and bring it back in the future. So very, very exciting there, and this is going to be a ton of fun. I can't wait to buy some of those maps and go for a Hateforge or save up for a Hateforge. I loved Ultimatum, so I'm very excited about this. All right, next up, we're going to touch on the Seismic Trap nerf, as well as the Lightning Strike bug fix that weren't originally brought up in the Balance Manifesto. We'll start off with Seismic here. So essentially at all damage levels, at all gem levels, it does about 30% less damage. Now, for most skills, 30% less damage, including Seismic, that's a pretty significant nerf. Now, however, when you think about it more logically, Seismic Trap's power not only came from its damage potential, which was through the roof, right? So you delete a boss in 8 seconds instead of 6 before. Like, you can still have crazy damage scaling potential, as well as the positional power that Seismic Trap had, right? Being able to just lay your damage down and run around and dodge mechanics is an extremely powerful bossing mechanic, right? Because a lot of times, especially if you think about a lot of melee builds, even spellcasters that didn't do damage over time, you had to find damage windows to stand still, deal damage, and then watch a mechanic and be ready to move at a moment's notice, and then you don't have any active damage going out while you run around dodging mechanics. Seismic Trap doesn't have to worry about that, right? So even with 30% less damage, it's still a very powerful bosser. It's still going to delete bosses in no time whatsoever with enough damage scaling, as well as in a mapping scenario. They didn't even use Seismic Trap for the most part in a mapping scenario, right? Most of the time they were using Exsanguinate. So overall, Seismic, although it took a nice big nerf of 30%, I still think it's plenty viable, and we'll still see plenty of play. So now we can touch on the Lightning Strike bug fix here. So Lightning Strike down here. Okay, so the bug fix here fixed a bug where Lightning Strike could hit a single target twice from one attack. Essentially what they're talking about here is Lightning Strike could hit with the melee strike, which was the lightning bolt coming from the ground, as well as the projectiles if you position your character properly. Apparently this was a bug and not intended, but it was very much abused by pretty much anybody who played Lightning Strike. That was one of the core mechanics you kind of had to learn so you can increase your bossing potential, basically double your damage with bosses if you position properly. So that's going away, which does suck, but No Nightblade nerfs means Lightning Strike is still plenty powerful, and although we took a hit on boss potential, I think Lightning Strike still does more than enough damage to deal with most bosses and encounters in the game. So overall, Lightning Strike is still intact and still very powerful. All right, last but not least, we got the Atlas changes coming for next patch. We'll quickly go over the list of Kirac mods available. So we got Fortune Favors the Brave, as always. Essence, glad to see that around. Abyss, Ambush, Heist, Legion, Blight, and Expedition. So to me, this list is actually pretty good. I've seen a lot of different opinions on that. Some of them thinking it's pretty boring, but in my personal opinion, I think this is a really good list. Essence still sticking around at 2 Chaos. That is amazing and very strong, very powerful early. I'm definitely going to be running that early on the map device. Ambush, seeing that still stick around. I love Ambush and messing around with the Sextants and scaling that up. That's a lot of fun with the Atlas passive skill tree too. Heist is an interesting one. 6 Chaos for 2 Smuggler's Caches. I think that's definitely worth it if you're somebody who likes to scale a lot of Heist through the Atlas passive skill tree and run Heist and sell contracts and blueprints and all that. That seems pretty reasonable. Legion at 6 Chaos is absolutely worth it if you ask me, because now we're talking about a chance to get 4 Legion encounters in a single map, right? You got the map device, you got the Atlas passive skill tree, you have the Sextant, and you have the Scarab. So you can have a chance at 4 Legion encounters, which is incredibly powerful and something I'm definitely going to be playing around with this league. Blight, I'm not really too concerned about Blight. I don't really run it a lot. But Expedition one, I think this is an interesting one. 12 Chaos, kind of steep, but when you think about how powerful Expedition is and the fact that you can run the Scarab on top of it, you're basically doubling the value of the Scarab you put in, possibly triple the value of the Scarab that you put in that map device. So really interesting one, pretty steep, but I think if you're fully targeting Expedition, that's an extremely powerful map device, and Expedition is an incredible. That's one of my previous videos. I ran a Legion Expedition strategy and it was insane. So it's cool to see both of those on the map device, and I can kind of play around with both and see what's more profitable. So really exciting list if you ask me. Other than that, basically what I'm going to go over here is some of the maps that were removed and added. So I got the good ones to me that were added back in, which is Silo. I love Silo as a map. I know it doesn't have any good divination cards or things of that nature, but Silo's layout, man, I guess not for Legion, but for everything else, Silo's layout is pretty awesome. I love the fact that it's just linear hallways, not a bunch of doorways, none of that. Just long, sort of narrow hallways where tons of mobs are packed in, and you just run down the hallways, nuke all the mobs, get to the boss, rinse and repeat. Don't even got to think. It's just a really great layout. I personally love it, and a lot of people seem to love Silo. So I'll definitely be messing around with Silo next league. Maybe seeing if I can manage to get Legion in there in Silo as well. We'll see how it works out. Pier, if you ask me, is another good map that was brought back. Pier is a very strong map. I don't think it has too many good div cards, but also just another strong layout, right? Overall, pretty open. I think you do got to double back a little bit, which can be a hindrance, but it's also a pretty large map with a lot of mobs, so you can scale mob counts very easily and sustain really easily, so that's good. Now let's go on to the bad ones that were removed. So we got City Square, Glacier, and Tropical Island. For me, those 3 were the top 3 ones that got removed. That made me pretty sad. City Square is a great layout. I loved running that map. It was a lot of fun. Glacier, once again, great layout, a lot of fun. A little harder to sustain Glacier, but just the map in general was just a really strong map layout, and it was a ton of fun to run. And then Tropical Island, that one really hurts. That hits me right in the feels. I loved Tropical Island. Also in my previous videos, I pretty much stated that Tropical Island was by far one of the best maps overall in terms of having a really accessible div card that was pretty powerful and decently and worth a decent amount without being too rare, as well as just being chock full of mobs and working really well with Delirium. So sad, really sad to see that one go, but I guess we're gonna have to find another map, change it up a little bit, see what works better in place of Tropical Island. We'll have to wait and see. All right, so that about does it for me on the review of the patch 3.19 official patch notes. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. What's your opinions on the patch notes? Do you agree with the Archnemesis changes? Are you excited about the league? Are you excited about the uniques? I want to hear all about it. I love talking PoE. I'm super hyped for the league. I'll try and respond to as many comments as I can. As always, if you like the video, please drop a like. It really helps. If you want to see more content in the future, go ahead and drop a subscribe, because I'll be posting a lot more with the new league coming up. I'll be pumping out as much content as I possibly can, especially now that the patch notes are out. We can just pretty much go crazy and go ham and post everything. So really excited to be making more content for you guys. Thanks again for watching till the end, and I'll see you next time.